In this video, you're going to learn the ins and outs of the arrow function. It's an ES6 feature, and we have taken a little look at it. Inside of Notes.js, we used it in a few basic examples to create methods like fetch notes and save notes, and we also passed it into a few array methods like filter right here and for each. We used it as the callback function that gets called once for every item in the array. Now, if you try to swap out all of the functions in a program with arrow functions, it's most likely not going to work as expected because there are some differences between the two. And it's really important to know what those differences are so you can make the decision to use a regular ES5 function or to use an ES6 arrow function. The goal in this video is to give you the knowledge to make that choice. And we're going to kick things off by creating a new file in the playground folder called arrow-function.js. Inside of here, we're going to play around with a few examples, going over some of the subtleties to the arrow function. Before we type anything inside of the file, I'm going to start up this file with NodeMon, so every time we make a change, it automatically refreshes over in the terminal. If you remember, NodeMon is that utility we installed earlier in this section. It was a global NPM module. NodeMon is the command to run, and then we just pass in the file path like we would for any other node command. Here we're going into the playground folder, and the file itself is called arrow-function.js. We're going to run the file, and nothing prints to the screen besides the NodeMon logs because we have nothing in the file. To get started, we're going to create a function called square by making a variable called square and setting it equal to an arrow function. To make our arrow function, we're going to first provide the arguments inside of parentheses. Since we're going to be squaring a number, we just need one number, and I'm going to refer to that number as x. If I pass in 3, I should expect 9 back, and if I pass in 9, I would expect 81 back. After the arguments list, we have to put the arrow in arrow function by putting the equal sign and the greater than symbol together, creating our nice little arrow. From here, we can go ahead and provide inside of curly braces all of the statements we want to execute. We might go ahead and create a variable called result, setting that equal to x times x. Then we might return the result variable using the return keyword. Now, obviously, this can be done on one line, but the goal here is to illustrate that when you use the statement arrow function, you can put as many lines as you want in between those curly braces. Let's go ahead and call square. We're going to do that using console.log so we can print the result to the screen. Console.log right here. I'm going to call square, and we're going to call square with 9. The square of 9 would be 81, so we would expect 81 to print to the screen. I'm going to save the arrow function file, and over here in the terminal, 81 shows up just like we expect. Now, this is the statement syntax for the arrow function. We've also explored the expression syntax, which lets you simplify your arrow functions when you're just going to be returning some expression. In this case, all we need to do is specify the expression we want to return. In our case, that's x times x. You don't need to explicitly add the return keyword. When you use an arrow function without your curly braces, it's implicitly provided for you. That means we can save the function just like this, and the exact same result is going to print to the screen. 81 shows up. This is one of the great advantages of arrow functions. When you're using them in cases like filter or for each, which we did in the notes.js file, it lets you simplify your code, keeping everything on one line and making your code a lot easier to maintain and scan. Now, there is one thing I want to note. When you have an arrow function that has just one argument, you can actually leave off the parentheses. If you have 2 or more arguments, or you have 0 arguments like this, you are going to need to provide the parentheses. But if you just have 1, you can reference it like this with no parentheses. If I save the file in this state, 81 still prints to the screen. And this is great. We have an even simpler version of our arrow function. Now that we have a basic example down, I want to move on to a more complex example that's going to explore the nuances between regular functions and arrow functions. To illustrate this, I'm going to make a variable called user, which is going to be an object. On this object, we're going to specify one property, name. Go ahead and set name equal to the string, your name. In this case, I'm going to set it equal to the string Andrew. Then we can go ahead and define a method on the user object. Right after name, with my comma at the end of the line, I'm going to provide the method sayHi, setting it equal to an arrow function that doesn't take any arguments. For the moment, we'll keep the arrow function really simple. all we're going to do inside of say hi is use console.log to print to the screen inside of template strings hi. We're not using template strings yet, but we will in a second, so I'm going to use them here. Down below, we can test out say hi by calling it user.sayhi. I'm going to go ahead and call it, then save the file, and we would expect that hi prints to the screen, because all our arrow function does is use console.log to print a static string. Nothing here is going to cause any problems. You'd be able to swap out a regular function for an arrow function without issue. Now, the first issue that's going to arise when you're using arrow functions is the fact that arrow functions do not bind a this keyword. So if you are using this inside of your function, it's not going to work when you swap it out for an arrow function. The this binding refers to the parent binding. In this case, there is no parent function, so this would refer to the global this keyword. Now here we have our console.log that does not use this. I'm going to swap it out for a case that does. We're going to put a period after hi, and I'll say I'm followed by the name, which we would usually be able to access via this.name. If I try to run this code, it is not going to work as expected. We're going to get hi, I'm undefined, printing to the screen, which is exactly what we have. In order to fix this, we're going to look at an alternative syntax to arrow functions that's great when you're defining object literals like we are right here. After say hi, I'm going to make a new method called say hi alt using a different ES6 feature. ES6 provides us a new way to make methods on objects. You provide the method name, say hi alt, then you go right to the parentheses, skipping the colon. There's also no need for the function keyword, even though it is a regular function. It's not an arrow function. Then we move on to our curly braces. Inside of here, I can have the exact same code we have above, but it is going to work as expected. It's going to print, hi, I'm Andrew. I'm going to call say hi alt down below instead of the regular say hi method, and right here you can see hi, I'm Andrew prints to the screen. This is a syntax that you can use to solve this problem when you're creating functions on object literals like we are here. Now that we know that the this keyword does not get bound, let's go ahead and explore one other quirk that arrow functions have. It also does not bind that arguments array. Regular functions, like the one we have here, are going to have an arguments array that's accessible inside of the function. Console.log arguments. Now, it's not an actual array. It's more like an object with array-like properties. You can Google that for more information. But the arguments object is indeed specified in a regular function. If I pass in 1, 2, and 3 and save the file, we're going to get that back when we log out arguments. Over inside of NodeMon, it's taking a quick second to restart. And right here, we have our object. We have 1, 2, and 3. We have the index for each as the property name. And this works because we're using a regular function. If we were to switch to the arrow function, though, it is not going to work as expected. I'm going to add console.log arguments inside of my arrow function, and I'm going to switch from calling say hi alt back to the original method say hi. When I save the file here, we're going to get something a lot different than what we had before. What we're actually getting is the global arguments variable. This is the arguments variable for that wrapper function we explored. Here we have things like the require function definition, our modules object, and a couple string paths to the file and to the current directory. These are obviously not what we're expecting. And that is another thing that you have to be aware of when you're using arrow functions. You're not going to get that arguments keyword. You're not going to get that this binding that you'd expect. These problems mostly arise when you try to create methods on an object and use arrow functions. I would highly recommend switching to this syntax in those cases. You get a simplified syntax, but you also get the this binding and you get your arguments variable like you'd expect. That is it for this video. You've explored a little bit more about arrow functions, how they work, when to use them, and when not to use them. In general, if you don't need the this keyword or the arguments keyword, you can use an arrow function without problem. And I always prefer using arrow functions over regular functions when I can. Now in the next section, when we explore asynchronous programming, we're going to use both regular functions and arrow functions a lot more, and you'll be able to see firsthand how to choose between one over the other. That's coming up in the next section, so stay tuned. I am super excited to get to it. I'll see you soon.